The council chamber doors sealed with a hiss that echoed through marble corridors built to intimidate. Ambassador Chen stood motionless as 7 alien species arranged themselves in judgment formation, their translators humming in discordant harmony. Behind the observation glass, Queen Xathren of the Valerian Empire watched with eyes that had seen 300 years of conquest. Her smallest child pressed against the barrier, four-fingered hands leaving prints on polished crystal. Chen had warned Earth Command this would happen. 3 cycles of perfect diplomacy, of bending without breaking, of swallowing insults disguised as cultural exchange. The Council had grown comfortable with humanity's measured responses, mistaking patience for weakness. They'd summoned him here to explain why human vessels refused to share jump drive specifications. Standard procedure, they called it. Mandatory technological contribution to galactic security. The Theranid ambassador clicked mandibles in what passed for smugness among insected species. Your species has delayed 18 standard months. The Council Charter, Section 47, Subsection Delta, requires. We've read it, Chen said. His voice carried no edge, no defensiveness. Just fact. The chamber stilled. Speaking without permission violated protocol. The Valerian Queen shifted in her observation post, her daughter's face pressing closer to the glass. The Kraven representative's scales darkened to angry crimson. You interrupt a formal inquiry. This disrespect confirms our suspicions about human reliability. Chen's hands remained clasped behind his back, parade rest position perfected through decades of military service before diplomatic corps reassignment. Apologies. Please continue. But something had changed in the room's atmosphere. The delegates exchanged glances through their various sensory organs, recalibrating. Humans had been deferential for 36 months. Polite. Accommodating. This flat acknowledgement without submission felt wrong to them, like a musical note played half-step off-key. The Kalian delegate, their species renowned for mediation and wisdom, leaned forward. Their 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of concentration. Ambassador Chen, humanity has benefited greatly from Council membership. Protection from hostile forces, access to established trade routes, technological exchanges. Your reluctance appears ungrateful. We're grateful, Chen said. We've said so in 47 official statements, countless informal conversations, and through consistent treaty compliance. Our gratitude isn't in question. Then, the specifications. The Theranid's translator made the demand sound reasonable, inevitable. Chen tilted his head slightly, the only movement he'd made since entering. No. The word dropped into silence like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward. In the observation room, the Queen's child tugged her mother's ceremonial robes. The young Valorian's voice carried through the chamber's acoustic design, meant to ensure transparency but now revealing innocence. Mother, why did the humans say it like that? Queen Xathren's hand moved to her daughter's shoulder. Hush, child. But the little one persisted, confusion in her tone. The others ask with words that mean he must. He says no like he means it. Like when you tell the generals no about the border wars. The Queen's eyes narrowed on Chen's back, reassessing. The Kraven ambassador rose to full height, nearly 3 meters of scaled muscle and barely restrained aggression. You refuse a direct council order? I decline to comply with the request, Chen corrected. The Charter requires technological sharing when species possess unique defensive capabilities that meaningfully impact collective security. Section 47, Subsection Delta, Clause 9. Our jump drives aren't unique. The Valorians have faster systems. The Kalian have more efficient ones. The Theranid network spans twice our range. What you're actually requesting is proprietary Earth technology that you want to reverse engineer for competitive advantage. The Theranid's mandibles clacked rapidly. Speculation and insult. Documentation and precedent. Chen's tone never shifted from neutral. The American hegemony made the same request 70 years before we joined the Council. You dissected their navigation systems and undercut their shipping monopoly within 18 months. They're now economically dependent on Kraven trade concessions. The Palaxian Union similarly contributed their medical technology. Theranid pharmaceutical corporations now control 60% of their domestic market. I can continue. The Kalian delegate's eyes blinked faster. You've been researching. For 36 months. Chen confirmed. Since the first preliminary inquiry about our propulsion systems. We arrived prepared to join the Council in good faith. We stayed prepared to protect our interests. Queen Exathren stepped closer to the glass. Her daughter watched the human stillness, the way he stood like a mountain while the council chamber erupted in agitated discussion. The child had seen her mother face down rebellion, negotiate planetary annexations, stare down assassination attempts with the same quality of absolute certainty this human now displayed. The Kravan ambassador slammed a fist against the podium. You accuse this council of conspiracy. I recite historical fact. Chen said. And I inform you that humanity respectfully declines this particular request. We remain committed to Council membership and treaty obligations. We will defend Council space, contribute to joint scientific ventures, participate in cultural exchanges, and honor all existing agreements. But we won't be harvested. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. The delegates realized simultaneously that this wasn't negotiation. The human hadn't arrived seeking compromise. He'd come to deliver a decision already made, wearing the mask of diplomacy to soften the refusal's edges. Bequilian's voice carried careful neutrality. And if the council insists? Chen turned to face them directly for the first time, and the queen's daughter gasped softly at his expression. Not angry. Not afraid. Just resolved. Then, humanity will withdraw from the council, he said. Effective immediately. We'll honor existing treaties with individual species who wish to continue relations. We'll maintain our territories, protect our citizens, and pursue our own path among the stars. The choice is yours. The child's voice cut through the stunned silence. Mother, the others looked scared now. They did. 7 species who'd grown accustomed to smaller civilizations bending to collective pressure now faced a simple truth. Humanity had grown strong enough to walk away. The Council needed Earth's resources, strategic position, and military capability more than Earth needed the Council's approval. Chen remained motionless, waiting for their answer. The Queen smiled. The Theranid ambassador's mandibles worked silently for 3 full seconds before sound emerged. You cannot simply leave the Council. The integration protocols, the shared infrastructure, the mutual defense pacts, all contain withdrawal clauses. Chen interrupted. Article 72 for integration protocols. Article 91 for infrastructure agreements. Article 103 for military alliances. Standard galactic law, established 900 years before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. We've spent the last year consulting with legal scholars from 6 neutral species. Our position is sound. The Kravan representative's scales had shifted from crimson to something approaching ash-gray. This is blackmail. This is boundary setting. Chen's posture remained parade rest perfect. The Council has 3 options. First, acknowledge that our jump drive technology falls outside mandatory sharing requirements, and allow us to continue as full members without this particular contribution. Second, insist on the specifications and accept our withdrawal from Council membership. Third, attempt to enforce compliance through coercion, which would constitute an act of war against the sovereign species. The Kalian delegates' eyes stopped blinking entirely, a sign of deep shock among their kind. You would fight the entire Council? We would defend ourselves against unlawful aggression. Chen's correction was precise, calculated. But I don't believe it would be the entire Council. The Valerian Empire has no vested interest in our propulsion systems. Your dimensional fold technology surpasses ours in every measurable way. The Palaxian Union remembers what happened to their medical patents. The Marekans certainly haven't forgotten their shipping industry's collapse. How unified would the Council actually be? Queen Exathren's daughter pressed both hands against the observation glass now. Mother, he's doing what you did at the Concordat Assembly. When the admirals wanted to expand the war and you told them to count their fleets versus yours. Hush, child. But the Queen's rebuke carried no force. Her attention remained fixed on the human ambassador's calculated dismantling of council leverage. The chamber's atmospheric controls hummed louder, compensating for the heat generated by agitated alien physiologies. The Theranid made 3 attempts to speak before words formed. You risk everything humanity has built within the galactic community. We risk one particular arrangement. Chen countered. Humanity has established direct diplomatic relations with 47 species. We maintain independent trade agreements with 33 governments. Our military has trained alongside 18 different armed forces. The Council is important, but it isn't everything. You've mistaken our cooperation for dependence. The Kravan ambassador turned to the Kaelian. This is your fault. Your species sponsored their membership. You vouched for their character, their trustworthiness. I vouched for their competence. Bequillian's translator carried an edge of something that might have been satisfaction. Which they're demonstrating admirably. This is not admirable. The Theranid's agitation manifested in rapid wingcase vibrations. This is manipulation, extortion, this is diplomacy. Chen's interruption was gentle but absolute. Imperfect species pursuing imperfect interests through negotiation rather than violence. The Council taught us that. We're simply better students than you expected. The Queen's daughter tugged her mother's robes again. Why do they look angry with him? He's being respectful. He hasn't raised his voice or made threats. He just says what's true and what humans will do. Axathran knelt beside her youngest, the movement surprising given her station's usual formality. What do you see when you look at that human, little one? The child studied Chen through the glass, her developing royal insight already sharper than many adults. He's alone but not lonely. Surrounded but not afraid. He came here knowing they would be angry and didn't try to make them happy. He just decided. Like you do? Yes, the Queen murmured. Like I do. The Kravan had begun pacing, a territorial display among their species that usually preceded violence. We cannot allow a member species to dictate terms to the Council. The precedent is already established. Chen's voice remained steady as a metronome. The Valerian Empire maintains independent military command structures despite Council membership. The Kaelian Union preserves cultural autonomy despite collective governance principles. The Haxor Collective negotiates separate trade agreements while benefiting from Council protection. Every species in this chamber has drawn lines about what they'll share and what they'll keep sovereign. Humanity is simply drawing ours. The observation room had filled with other dignitaries, word spreading through the station that something unprecedented was happening in the Council chamber. The Queen's daughter noticed her older siblings entering, military advisors, cultural attaches, all pressing close to watch. Sister, one of the older princes whispered to another. The human plans to leave the Council. Father said they were our most promising new allies. Watch, the sister replied. He's not planning to leave. He's making them choose. The Kaelian delegate rose slowly, their species equivalent of calling for attention. Ambassador Chen. A hypothetical. If the Council were to acknowledge that your technology falls outside mandatory sharing requirements, what would humanity contribute to collective security? The shift in tone was microscopic but crucial. From demand to question. From judgment to negotiation. Chen's expression didn't change, but something in the chamber's tension eased fractionally. Humanity would continue current contribution levels. Our fleet remains available for joint operations. Our colonies provide strategic staging areas for Council forces. Our intelligence network shares threat assessments. Our research institutes collaborate on non-proprietary projects. We're not asking to take. We're asking to keep what's ours. The Theranid started to object, but the Kaelian raised the appendage for silence. And if future technology disputes arise? We negotiate in good faith, guided by charter definitions of unique defensive capabilities and collective security needs. Chen paused. just as every other species does when their interests diverge from council preference. The chamber fell silent. The delegates understood the elegance of the trap. If they rejected humanity's position, they'd have to justify why humans deserve different treatment than established members. If they accepted, they'd acknowledge that the Council's power had limits even over species who chose to remain. The Queen's daughter watched the Kraven ambassador deflate slightly, scales returning to neutral coloration. The Theronid's mandibles stilled. One by one, the delegates recognized the situation had transformed without anyone noticing the exact moment of change. "Mother," the child whispered. "He came here to lose, didn't he? But he made losing look like winning, so they have to let him win to save their own faces." Exathran smiled. "Not precisely, but close enough. He came here to make them understand that forcing compliance costs more than accepting boundaries. Watch how he finishes." Chen's hands remained clasped behind his back. "Honored delegates, humanity sought council membership because we believed in collective security and mutual benefit. We still do. But benefit must be mutual. Partnership must be voluntary. If those principles no longer guide council policy, we'll pursue our interests elsewhere without hostility or resentment. If they remain foundational, we'll continue as we have, contributing meaningfully while preserving our sovereignty. The decision, as always, belongs to you." The Kaelian looked to the Kraven, then the Theronid, reading calculations in alien physiologies. "The Council will recess to discuss this matter privately. Ambassador Chen, please wait in the anteroom." "Of course." Chen inclined his head precisely 15 degrees, the formal diplomatic gesture he'd offered at every previous council session. Nothing had changed in his demeanor from the moment he'd entered to the moment he departed. That consistency, that absolute refusal to show triumph or concern, made the display even more powerful. As the doors sealed behind him, the Queen's daughter turned to her mother. "Will they let him win?" "They already have," Exathran said. "They just need time to make it look like their choice." In the council chamber, the Quillian's voice carried quiet authority. "The Valerian observer has been silent throughout these proceedings. Queen Exathran, your perspective would be valued." The observation glass became a screen, the Queen's image appearing before the assembled delegates. Her youngest daughter peeked into frame before being gently moved aside. "The human told you the truth," Exathran said. "Uncomfortable truth delivered with perfect courtesy, but truth nonetheless. You can force him to leave and lose everything humanity offers. You can negotiate boundaries and keep a valuable ally. Or you can attempt coercion and discover exactly how competent their military has become." She paused. "I've fought wars against enemies who wanted my empire destroyed. I've negotiated with rivals who wanted my resources. I've never encountered someone who simply wanted to be left alone in specific areas while remaining engaged everywhere else. It's refreshing." The Theronid's translator carried bitter resignation. "The Valerian Empire finds this acceptable?" "The Valerian Empire finds this familiar," the Queen corrected. "We maintain clear boundaries about our sovereignty. We expect the same from worthy partners. Humanity has demonstrated they're worthy. The question is whether the Council is wise enough to recognize it." The screen darkened. The delegates sat in silence broken only by environmental systems and the subtle sounds of alien respiration. Finally, the Kaelian spoke. "We acknowledge that human jump drive technology falls outside mandatory sharing requirements per charter definitions. Humanity will continue as full council members without this particular contribution." The Kraven's objection died unspoken. The Theronid's mandibles clicked once in defeat. The vote, when called, was unanimous. Because the alternative was admitting they'd been outmaneuvered by a species barely a century into galactic politics. When Chen was recalled and informed of the decision, his only response was another 15-degree bow. "Humanity thanks the Council for their wisdom, and reaffirms our commitment to collective security." He left the chamber with the same measured pace he'd entered, never hurrying, never hesitating. The delegates watched him go, each calculating how this moment would reshape their approach to the newest galactic power. In the observation room, The queen's daughter tugged her mother's robes one final time. "Mother, when I'm queen, can I have him as an ambassador?" Exathren laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "If you're half that capable when you take the throne, my daughter, you won't need him. You'll be him." The human delegation's quarters occupied a modest section of Council Station Gamma, deliberately chosen to avoid the appearance of presumption. Chen's team had already begun packing before he returned from the chamber. Contingency plans activated the moment he delivered humanity's ultimatum. They paused when he entered, reading his expression for signals. "We're staying," he said simply. "Resume normal operations." Commander Sarah Okonkwo, humanity's military liaison, exhaled slowly. "They folded? They chose wisdom over pride." Chen removed his formal diplomatic jacket, the ceremonial weight of it suddenly, feeling like exactly what it was, costume. "The Kalian understand game theory. The Valorians recognize strength. The others eventually followed the math. The Theranids won't forget." Dr. James Kirovsky, xenopsychology specialist, pulled up holographic displays showing the insected delegates' physiological stress markers during the session. "Their entire trade model depends on technology arbitrage. We just cost them a significant acquisition. They'll adapt or decline." Chen's tone carried no satisfaction. "Species that can't adjust to changing circumstances don't survive long in galactic politics. We've learned that watching their own history." Okonkwo moved to the window overlooking the station's central hub, where dozens of species mingled in the neutral commerce zones. "Earth Command will want a full briefing. They'll ask if we should have pushed harder, demanded concessions. We got what we needed," Chen said. "Recognition that humanity isn't a resource to be harvested. Everything else is negotiable, but that's foundational. Push too hard and we force them into corners. Corners make species dangerous." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Kirovsky's eyes widened reading the header. "It's from the Valrian Royal Court. Personal message from Queen Exathren to Ambassador Chin." The team exchanged glances. Personal communications from the Empire's ruler were rare enough to be noteworthy. Chin accepted the data tablet, scanning the brief text. "She requests a private meeting," he said. "Tomorrow, informal setting, no official record. Could be a trap." Okonkwo's military training manifested in automatic threat assessment. "The Valorians stayed neutral during the session, but they have their own interests. If Exathren wanted me dead, I'd already be dead." Chin smiled slightly. 300-year-old conqueror queens don't need elaborate assassination plots. She wants to talk, which means she's curious. Kirovsky brought up the Queen's public file, though everyone on the team had already memorized its contents. "Youngest daughter's name is Kirthren. 8 years old, standard galactic age. 5th in succession, unlikely to inherit but receiving full royal education. She was in the observation room during your session." I noticed. Chin had felt the child's attention like a tangible weight, different from the calculating observation of adults. Children saw patterns that educated minds had learned to ignore. "What do we know about Valerian child-rearing protocols?" "Royal children accompany parents to formal functions from age 5 onward," Kirovsky read from his notes. "Considered essential education in governance. They're expected to observe silently but process everything. Exathren has brought Kirthren to 73 official events in the past 2 years. And today she spoke during a council session." Chin processed the implications. "Breaking protocol in front of 7 species ambassadors. The Queen allowed it, which means she wanted that perspective voiced." Okonkwo frowned. "What perspective? From what we observed, the child just asked obvious questions." "Exactly." Chin pulled up the session recording, isolating the moments when Kirthren had spoken. She identified that the other delegates used language implying obligation while I used language implying choice. She noticed their fear when I offered to withdraw. She compared my demeanor to her mother's during military confrontations. A child cutting through diplomatic rhetoric to see power dynamics clearly. And the Queen wanted the delegates to hear that analysis, Kirovsky said slowly. From an innocent source they couldn't dismiss as political manipulation. Chen nodded. Exethren was sending a message to the council chamber. This wasn't human arrogance or brinkmanship. It was simple recognition of power relationships, obvious enough for a child to articulate. The team fell silent, reassessing the observation room's role in the day's events. What they'd interpreted as unfortunate distraction had been calculated intervention. So the meeting tomorrow, Okonko said. She's recruiting? She's evaluating. Chen set down the tablet. The Valerian Empire spans 400 systems. They've survived 3 major galactic conflicts and 2 internal civil wars. They don't maintain that position through conquest alone. They need allies who understand power without being corrupted by it. And she thinks humanity qualifies? She thinks we might. Chen moved to the window beside Okonkwo, watching a Theranid merchant negotiate with a Palaxian trader, both species who'd learned painful lessons about council economics. We're young, relatively weak, and we just faced down the entire council over a principle. That's either admirable stupidity or strategic thinking. She wants to determine which. Kirovsky began preparation protocols automatically. We'll need cultural briefing updates, gift protocol review, security coordination. No. Chen interrupted gently. Just me. She specified informal and private. Taking a delegation would insult her intelligence. Okonkwo's military training rebelled against the idea. Sir, without backup, I'll have the most powerful backup possible. Chen smiled. The Queen's personal guarantee of safety. If she violates guest hospitality, she damages her reputation across the entire galactic community. That matters more to Valorians than any tactical advantage. The discussion continued for another hour, but Chen's decision remained firm. Tomorrow he would meet Queen Exethren alone, 2 individuals speaking without the weight of official positions, and whatever was said would shape humanity's relationships with the galaxy's second-largest empire. That night, Chen reviewed everything humanity had learned about Valerian culture, history, and diplomatic patterns. But he kept returning to the child's observations, the way Kirthren had identified truth through questions rather than statements. Perhaps that was the real test. Not whether he could negotiate with the Queen, but whether he could see clearly enough to recognize what was actually being negotiated. The Valerian embassy occupied an entire section of Council Station Gamma's diplomatic quarter, its architecture deliberately imposing without being threatening. Chen arrived precisely on time, either early enough to seem anxious nor late enough to imply disrespect. The guards at the entrance were professional, efficient, and clearly informed of his arrival. They led him through corridors that subtly transitioned from station standard to Valerian aesthetic, higher ceilings, broader spaces, lighting that mimicked their homeworld's dual suns. He catalogued details automatically while keeping his expression neutral and observant. Queen Exethren waited in a private garden, an environmental bubble maintaining Valerian atmospheric conditions while displaying earth flowers. The gesture was pointed. She'd researched his homeworld as thoroughly as he'd researched hers. Ambassador Chen. Her voice carried authority that needed no volume. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Your Majesty. He bowed, Valerian style this time, 45 degrees with hands visible. The honor is mine. Dispense with formality, she said. I have hundreds of people who bow and use proper titles. I need someone who tells truth. She gestured to a seat positioned to give them equal height despite her species' greater stature. My daughter asked about you last night. For 3 hours. Until I threatened to remove her library privileges. Chen smiled. Children ask the questions adults forget are important. She asked why you weren't afraid. Exethren settled into her own seat with the grace of centuries. I told her you were afraid, but you understood fear differently than most species. And what did she say? She said that couldn't be right, because afraid people try to make others happy. You didn't try to make the council happy. You just told them what was true and let them decide. The Queen's eyes held ancient intelligence. She's 8 years old and already understands diplomacy better than half my advisors. She had an excellent teacher watching the session, Chen said. Flattery? Observation. He met her gaze directly, neither aggressive nor submissive. You allowed her to speak during a formal council inquiry. That wasn't accident or indulgence. You knew her questions would frame the situation in ways the delegates couldn't dismiss. Xathren laughed, the sound carrying genuine pleasure. I was told humans learn quickly. The reports understated significantly. She leaned forward slightly. I'm going to tell you something that cannot leave this garden. If you repeat it, I'll deny it completely and your credibility will suffer while mine remains intact. Understood? Yes. The council is dying. She said it without drama, just flat statement. Not tomorrow, not next year, but within 2 generations at current trajectory. The species who formed it 300 years ago created structures for their own convenience. They never adapted those structures for genuine multi-species cooperation. Every new member is harvested for advantage until they're either assimilated or neutralized. Chen remained still, processing implications. The Valerian Empire never joined the council. Xathren continued. We sign mutual defense treaties, we participate in economic frameworks, we maintain embassies and diplomatic relations. But we never gave them authority over our sovereignty. We watched the Americans and the Palaxians and 17 other species get dismantled piece by piece. Why tell me this? Because yesterday, humanity became the first species in 80 years to establish boundaries without leaving the council. You stayed inside the system while refusing to be consumed by it. Her expression shifted to something approaching respect. That's remarkable. Possibly unprecedented. And it makes you either humanity's greatest diplomat or its luckiest fool. Which do you think I am? I think you prepared for 36 months, studied every precedent, built alliances with neutral species, coordinated with Earth Command, and walked into that chamber knowing exactly how much pressure the Council could apply before risking more than they'd gain. She paused. But I also think you genuinely didn't know if they'd call your bluff. It wasn't a bluff, Chen said quietly. Humanity would have withdrawn. Yes. That's what made it terrifying for them. Xathren gestured toward the earth flowers. You brought authentic uncertainty into a chamber designed to eliminate it. The Council operates on predictability, on knowing that species need them more than they need any individual species. You made them uncertain. That's power. A small sound drew their attention. Kirthren stood in the garden entrance, clearly instructed to remain silent but unable to contain her curiosity. The Queen sighed. Come, child. You've already interrupted state business once this week. Might as well make it consistent. The young princess approached with careful steps, studying Chen with intense focus. Mother said I could listen if I don't speak. Your mother is wise, Chen said. Though I found your speaking yesterday quite helpful. Kirthren brightened. Really? Father said I embarrassed the family. My brother said I acted like a hatchling. Your father is diplomatic and your brothers are threatened. Xathren said mildly. Ambassador Qing is correct. You identified patterns that adult observers missed because they were too educated to see them. The child settled near her mother's seat, attention fixed on Chen. Why didn't you try to make them like you? Because making them like me wasn't the goal, Chen said. Understanding our relationship accurately was the goal. But people who like you give you what you want. Sometimes. But people who respect boundaries give you sustainable partnerships. Friendship built on one person always giving in isn't friendship. It's dependency. Kirthren processed this with visible concentration. Like when my brother always wins games because we let him. And then, he's angry when someone doesn't let him win? Exactly like that. Xathren watched the exchange with calculating interest. Ambassador Chen, I invited you here because the Valerian Empire is considering a significant policy shift. We've maintained careful distance from council entanglements for 2 centuries. We've watched younger species make mistakes we avoided. But isolation has its own costs. You're considering deeper engagement, Chen said. We're considering strategic partnerships with species who understand sovereignty. She let the implication hang in the air. Humanity just demonstrated they might qualify. But I need to understand if yesterday was aberration or pattern. If you're capable of that kind of clarity once or consistently. You're asking if we'll break, Chen said. If future pressure will erode our boundaries until we become another Marekan or Palaxian situation. Yes. Chen was quiet for several seconds, aware that Kirthran was watching him think. Finally, he spoke. Your Majesty, I can't guarantee humanity will never make mistakes or compromise poorly. We're young, we're learning, we'll stumble. But I can tell you that yesterday was an accident. It was the result of Earth Command spending 3 years studying Council patterns, identifying strategic vulnerabilities, and building consensus across our entire species that some boundaries are worth fighting for. 3 years? Exathran repeated. You planned that confrontation before you even arrived at Council Station. We prepared for it, Chen corrected. We hoped it wouldn't be necessary. But humans learn expensive lessons about giving away sovereignty before we reach the stars. We've been invaded, colonized, economically dominated, culturally assimilated. Multiple times by our own kind. We know what happens when you trade independence for temporary security. Kirthran looked at her mother. They learned before they met us. Like you learned before I was born. Yes, child. Exathran's expression softened slightly. Species either learn those lessons early and survive, or never learn them and disappear. Chen felt the conversation reaching its critical point. What exactly is the Valerian Empire proposing? Nothing formal. Nothing the Council needs to know about. Exathran stood, forcing Chen to rise as well. But perhaps our military forces train together more frequently. Perhaps our trade agreements expand beyond current frameworks. Perhaps our intelligence services share information about Council patterns with species who understand how to use it without overreaching. An informal alliance. An understanding between species who respect each other's boundaries. She moved toward the garden exit, her daughter following. The Council sees members as resources. The Valerian Empire sees partners as equals. Yesterday you demonstrated humanity understands the difference. Chen processed the enormity of what was being offered. The Valerian Empire didn't need Council membership because they had independent strength. If humanity could maintain similar independence while remaining inside Council structures, they'd occupy a unique position, benefiting from both frameworks without being trapped by either. I'll convey this conversation to Earth Command, he said. Carefully. See that you do. Exathran paused at the entrance. And Ambassador Chen? Bring your Commander Okonkwo to our next meeting. Kirthran's military instructors could benefit from observing human tactical frameworks. Your species' approach to asymmetric warfare is intriguingly creative. The Queen departed, leaving Chen alone with the young princess who'd stayed behind against protocol. Ambassador Chen? Kirthran's voice was small but clear. When I'm queen, will humans be our friends? Chen knelt to bring himself to her eye level. If we both keep learning how to respect boundaries and tell truth, yes. We'll be excellent friends. She smiled then, hurried after her mother. Chen stood in the garden among earth flowers on an alien station, understanding that humanity had just navigated not one but 2 critical diplomatic moments. The Council had learned humans wouldn't be harvested. The Valorians had learned humans might be trusted. Both lessons mattered. Both would shape humanity's next century among the stars. He left the garden feeling more hopeful than he had in 36 months. Earth Command's response took 6 hours to arrive, secure transmission bouncing through enough relay points to frustrate any surveillance. Chen read it alone in his quarters, away from his team, aware that what he held would reshape human diplomatic strategy for decades. Classified eyes-only Ambassador Chen. Your session transcript and Valerian contact report analyzed. Earth Command consensus. Proceed with Valerian informal alliance development. Exercise maximum discretion. Do not inform Council or member species of expanded relationship. Continue normal operations while building secondary framework with Valerian Empire. Strategic assessment. You were correct that Council sees members as resources. Your boundary setting established humanity's independence. Valerian interest validates that approach. We're authorizing expanded engagement on following principles: maintain Council membership and treaty compliance, develop parallel Valerian relationship without Council oversight, share specific military/intelligence data with Valorians but not Council, position humanity as bridge between Council and independent powers, use this leverage to reshape Council dynamics from within. Commander Okonkwo authorized for military liaison duties. Dr. Kirovsky approved for cultural exchange protocols. You have discretionary authority for informal commitments pending formal treaty development. Additional note: we're seeing increased chatter from other species about yesterday's session. Apparently the Kaelian are privately communicating with neutral governments, suggesting humanity's approach as template for future boundary negotiations. You may have started something larger than anticipated. Proceed carefully. Report weekly. Trust your judgment. Earth Command sends congratulations and caution in equal measure. End transmission. Chin deleted the message after memorizing its contents, then sat quietly processing the implications. Earth Command understood the situation's complexity, which was reassuring. They also understood that he'd committed humanity to a delicate balance, maintaining Council membership while building alternatives to Council dependence. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Okonkwo entered at his gesture, expression carefully neutral. Earth Command's response just reached you, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. We're authorized to proceed with Valerian engagement. Your designated military liaison. She nodded slowly. I expected as much. The Valorians don't make overtures like that without serious intent. Queen Axathran has been watching human military operations for months. Our asymmetric warfare doctrine interests them. Why? Chin knew the answer but wanted her perspective. Because we're small and they're ancient, Okonkwo said. We've developed approaches for winning fights we shouldn't win. The Valerian Empire has overwhelming force, but force isn't always the solution. They're smart enough to recognize that our weakness forced us to develop strategic creativity they've never needed to cultivate. What happens when we're not weak anymore? Then, we'll need to remember those lessons while we have strength to back them up. She moved to the window, looking out at the station's central hub. That's the real test, isn't it? Whether humanity can maintain strategic flexibility as we grow more powerful. Chin joined her at the window. The Council failed that test 300 years ago. They became comfortable with their dominance and stopped adapting. Now they're confused when species like humanity refuse to fit expected patterns. And the Valorians? They adapted continuously for 400 years. That's why they're still relevant while older empires collapsed. He paused. Axathran brought her daughter to our conversation today. Let her watch negotiations. Encouraged her to ask questions. Okonkwo smiled slightly. Training the next generation to think beyond comfort zones. That's how species survive long term. That's why they're interested in humanity. We haven't had time to develop comfortable patterns. We're still figuring things out, which makes us flexible in ways they've forgotten how to be. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching dozens of species negotiate, trade, argue, and cooperate in the space below. The Council Station represented galactic civilization's best attempt at multi-species harmony. But harmony built on exploitation wasn't sustainable. Commander, Chin said finally, when you meet with Valerian military contacts, remember they're testing us as much as collaborating. They want to know if humanity will maintain ethical standards as we gain strength. If we'll use asymmetric advantages responsibly. And if we fail that test? Then, we become just another aggressive species that needs containment. The Valorians will withdraw, and we'll face the galactic community alone. He turned from the window. We can't afford that outcome. Okonkwo straightened to attention, not quite formal but acknowledging the weight of responsibility. I'll remember, sir. Human creativity with Valerian ethics might actually build something worth maintaining. After she left, Chen returned to his desk and began drafting the first of many careful reports. To Earth Command about Valerian engagement. To the Council about routine diplomatic activities. To various contacts among neutral species about humanity's commitment to fair partnership. Each message was truth, carefully framed for its audience. That was diplomacy's essence, not lying, but understanding which truths mattered most to different listeners. His communicator chimed with an incoming call from Dr. Kirovsky. Ambassador, you need to see this. The Palaxian delegate just requested a private meeting with you. Unofficial, no records. Chen's interest sharpened. The Palaxians had been one of the species harvested by Council economic policies, their medical technology stripped away for others' profit. When? Tomorrow. She specifically asked for the same terms as your Valerian meeting. Just you, informal location, honest conversation. Interesting. Chen pulled up the Palaxian Union's current status. Still recovering from their technology loss, economically dependent on larger powers, politically weakened but not broken. What do you think she wants? To learn how you did it, Kirovsky said. How you stood up to the Council without being destroyed. The Palaxians tried similar resistance 70 years ago, and got crushed. They need to know if something's changed or if humanity just got lucky. Chen considered the implications. If the Palaxians were reaching out, other species might follow. The session in the council chamber hadn't just been about human independence, it had been a demonstration that resistance was possible. Accept the meeting, he said. Same protocols as the Valerian session. And, Doctor? Start cataloging which other species might contact us. This might become a pattern. Already working on it. Preliminary analysis suggests at least 6 species in similar positions to the Palaxians. If word spreads that humanity successfully resisted council pressure, we could see a wave of discreet inquiries. After ending the call, Chen sat back in his chair and allowed himself a moment of genuine concern. Earth Command had authorized him to build bridges with the Valorians, to maintain council membership while developing alternatives. But they hadn't anticipated him becoming a symbol of resistance for oppressed council members. That could be extraordinarily useful or incredibly dangerous, depending on how the dominant council species responded. He pulled up the recording of yesterday's session one more time, watching his own performance with critical distance. He'd been careful to appear reasonable, to use charter language, to frame humanity's position as precedent rather than revolution. He'd given the council space to accept his boundaries without losing face. But other species watching that recording might see something different. They might see possibility. Hope. A template for their own resistance. Chen made a note to consult with Earth Command about expanded diplomatic operations. If humanity was going to become a symbol, they needed to do it intentionally and carefully. Supporting other species' independence could benefit everyone, or trigger a council crackdown that would make yesterday's session look gentle. The line between diplomat and revolutionary was sometimes measured in perception rather than action. His terminal chimed with another message, this one from an unexpected source. The Kalian delegate, requesting a formal discussion about evolving council dynamics and opportunities for mutual understanding. Chen smiled despite the situation's complexity. The Kalians had been the most sympathetic during yesterday's session, the first to suggest compromise rather than confrontation. Now they wanted to talk privately about evolving dynamics. They saw the same pattern he was beginning to recognize. The council's old model was breaking. Not dramatically, not with violence or sudden collapse, but through gradual erosion as younger species refused to accept terms that had been unquestionable for centuries. Humanity hadn't planned to be revolutionary. They just wanted to keep their jump drive technology. But sometimes the most significant changes came from simple acts of boundary setting that revealed larger structural problems. Chen accepted the Kalian meeting request, adding it to the schedule that was rapidly filling with species who wanted to understand what humanity had done, and whether they could do it too. Outside his window, Council Station Gamma continued its normal operations. Species traded, negotiated, cooperated. The structures of galactic civilization remained intact. But something fundamental had shifted. And everyone was beginning to notice. Chin prepared for tomorrow's meetings, aware that he was no longer just representing humanity in galactic politics. He was potentially shaping what galactic politics would become. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any diplomatic protocol. He thought of Kier Thren's question, would humans be friends when she became queen? The answer depended on whether humanity could maintain integrity while navigating increasingly complex relationships. Whether they could hold boundaries without becoming isolated. Whether they could support others' independence without triggering wars they couldn't win. Chin had spent 36 months preparing for one conversation in a council chamber. Now he faced decades of similar conversations, each one carrying consequences that rippled across the galaxy. He was ready. Human diplomatic corps had trained him for exactly this kind of complexity. Earth Command trusted his judgment. His team was competent and committed. But readiness and success weren't the same thing. Chin allowed himself one moment of doubt, acknowledging the immense scope of what lay ahead. Then, he filed it away and returned to work. Doubt was human. So was determination. Tomorrow he would meet with the Palaxian delegate and listen to her story. He would meet with the Kaelian and discuss evolving dynamics. He would continue building relationships with the Valorians while maintaining council obligations. And somewhere in all of that complexity, humanity would find its path among the stars, independent but not isolated, strong but not aggressive, principled but not rigid. The child had asked why he wasn't afraid. The truth was that he was terrified. But fear was just information, not instruction. It told you the stakes were high. It didn't tell you to stop. Chin reviewed tomorrow's schedules one final time, then allowed himself to rest. The galaxy was changing. Humanity was part of that change. And Ambassador Chin was the person standing at the intersection of old patterns and new possibilities. He would do his best to make sure humanity's influence pushed things toward justice rather than chaos. That was all anyone could do. It would have to be enough.